what is it? What does it feel like, so that you can recognize when you're there and realize that the next step you take in that direction is going to actually create some new space for yourself.
You are listening to And If Love Remains, a unique show spotlighting people, ideas, science, culture, and art. Your host, Mike Lovett.
You are listening, yes, to that great podcast in the sky. And if love remains, I am its messenger, Mike Levitt. And welcome to the show. We have with us the Prince of Pianism, the maestro of music. Yes, he's back, ladies and gentlemen. Elias Axel Pedersen. Welcome back, sir.
Hey, Mike, I like the intro. That was cool.
Thank you. You got to change it up once in a while.
I like it. Yeah.
And once again, we have a very special guest, somebody that we've had on before, a friend of the program. Always happy to have Frederic Chiu, just one of the great performers of our day. Really excited to have him on. Thank you so much for joining us again on And If Love Remains, Frederic.
It's my great pleasure to be here. Great pleasure.
Fantastic. Well, there's so much that I want to just jump into, but if Elias will allow, I want to start here because I'm fortunate enough to be friends with you on Facebook. So I see some of the things that you're doing specifically with some of your students. And it is really remarkable. I know that this is, if I'm not mistaken, kind of a new endeavor for you to take on students. But I want to talk to you just about your teaching process. And I mean, because some of your students, I just saw something where you have a program where they're playing a Chopin etude in all 12 keys, stuff like that. I mean,
right. Yeah, that's
insane.
That's something that I started. Well, to go back to just teaching in general.
Yeah.
For many years, I've taught workshops, private workshops for small groups, and I love teaching, and that was the way I wanted to teach for a long time. And I would say that was because what I was trying to do was a little bit unusual, and also I didn't feel confident enough handling students over a long period of time, like a 4-year bachelor diploma program, or and then add 2 years of master's, and add I didn't feel like that was something that I could handle. But during the pandemic, I started full-time teaching, and it was great. It was the right time, and especially the right place. I started teaching at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, which is an amazing school. The people there, anybody involved in Carnegie Mellon, they're so intelligent and so just results oriented. It's really quite remarkable. I have a great class of students there, and when I first started teaching, it was online because of the pandemic, and it was kind of interesting because not having had academic teaching experience over the long term, when I started teaching and it was online, I was like, great, let's use all these tools and just do it. And in some ways, I was not encumbered by experience teaching the normal way, like a lot of my colleagues were. And then every year, as the pandemic kind of lifted and things got back to in person, my learning curve was just greater and greater. So now everything is back in person, and I'm finding myself suddenly with not only everything from before back with recording and performing and all the other non-musical stuff that I do, but now I've added full-time teaching as well.
Right.
It's a bit of a struggle that I'm still trying to figure out, but it's a good struggle to have.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me a little bit about, because that's what's interesting. One of the interesting, there's a lot there, but one of the interesting things is, most of us who teach, full-time students kind of a thing, we definitely started in person and really struggled with the online thing. I did. I mean, I really struggled with that.
Yeah.
And then coming back, but you kind of had the opposite thing. Talk to me about the differences, what, advantages, like how did you find that transition to go?
Well, I think not having, like I said, not being encumbered by experience of something that worked that now couldn't work, I just went right into problem solving. And I think eventually, everybody got on board and tools
Right.
started to appear and people started sharing their experiences and how to use this or that, best practices. So it was all, kind of an evolution for everyone. But I would say that at the height of the pandemic, when I was teaching students, I also do some adjunct teaching at the Hart School in Hartford, Connecticut. So there are a lot of Chinese students who do their undergrad in China who come to do their masters at the Hart School. So at one point, I was teaching students starting on the East Coast during the morning afternoon period, and then kind of shifting over to the West Coast based students who were 3 hours behind, and then eventually shifting to Chinese students who were in China 12 hours behind. And I was teaching until like midnight, 1 o'clock.
Oh, wow.
it was pretty cool, I have to say. Me sitting in the studio and just receiving all of these signals coming from all over the world. It was a
That is cool.
pretty
That
incredible
is
thing.
Can I have a quick interlude here, and we'll get to the disc clavier part later, but I'm wondering, were you teaching with a disc clavier, and did you have possibilities of students that had the same piano, and so you could hear them through that, or was it all pretty standard? They were on an acoustic piano in their place, and you used either Zoom or FaceTime or whatever
Yeah,
method.
at the very beginning, when everybody was just at home, that was just Zoom and just normal audio, normal pianos. But then in the second year, I was able to get a disc clavier into my studio in Pittsburgh,
Mm. Oh,
and I
nice.
had one at home. And so then, when the students were on campus, but I wasn't, they could go to the studio, and we started doing the disc clavier internet remote control kind of
That's
distance
awesome.
learning, which was remarkable. And I developed some techniques that I've shared with a lot of disc clavier users, where the student would be playing and I would be sitting in front of my piano watching the keys from a performer's perspective. So really being able to see like which keys they were pressing down, and I would take off my shoes and put the big toes on the left and right pedals, and I could
Mm.
feel them pedaling
Are you
Hmm.
kidding?
because the
That is
pedals
just
move in the
insane.
disc clavier. Yeah, so then I could really tell like if they were doing things right or not. And that was great. And that's how I've continued to do some remote teaching with all students using Disclivir. Now it's a choice. It's not a it's not a
Yeah,
forced option.
the
It's
necessity.
something
Yeah.
that actually I prefer in certain circumstances every once in a while.
Wow.
Hmm. Oh,
I
that's
mean, that
awesome.
is that is really cool. And as far as like, I guess at that point, then you're not so much concerned with things like oh, I forgot the word, uh, the time that it takes, when you're on an internet call, like, because you have the physical things that are happening on
Right.
your piano. Am I understanding that
Yeah,
correctly?
the latency. Yeah, the
The
latency
latency. There you go. Thank you,
is
man.
it's
I think I was a boomer.
synchronized so that the video and what happens on the keys are synchronized. So there's a little bit of latency. There's like a half second or so,
Hmm.
but I'm just basically turning off the Zoom audio whenever there's piano playing going and letting the piano in front of me play,
Sure.
and then I'm just listening to them playing basically, which is
Hmm.
so different than all these
Are
Zoom
there?
things.
I wonder if there are any glitches or delays once in a while, like there would be for an internet, latency issue with the actual piano, or is it on a more stable network, so it goes quicker? Maybe it doesn't have as much information to transfer as like a Zoom call, but maybe it has more. I don't know if there are points when you're hearing the piano play in front of you where it pauses for a second, then has a lot of fast notes at once.
Yeah, no, it doesn't do that because the great thing about the technology is
Maybe
that the
buffering.
signal is very, very low res. Like I can
Yeah. Okay.
record something like a 10-minute piece, and the file is like 100K.
Right, because it's basically a glorified MIDI file, right?
Yeah, it's a MIDI file, and the nuance and the incredible detail of the sound is actually built into the machines. It's built
Right,
into the instrument, and so
Yeah.
when you have
So it's
two
not
great
having to be
machines on
transferred.
either end, you don't have to send that much signal.
oh,
Right.
that's
That makes a lot of sense. That's great because you
So
don't
that
have
was
as
great.
many
The delay
connection
was,
problems.
yeah, the delay was not an issue at all.
wow. That. I mean, that makes such a big difference. That's really great. Um, and
So
then
cool.
uh, talk to me like so you had um eh, I guess as you're approaching kind of these students, what are you, we talked a little bit about the technology and the technique of it, but what are you focusing on? You're working on bachelor students, you're working on students that have a desire, it sounds like, to make music their career.
Hmm.
Um, how are you approaching them from your standpoint with your experience?
Yeah, yeah. I have super serious students who are just focused on a piano career. I have other students who are doing a kind of a dual major, very similar to what I did when I was doing my undergrad with piano and computer science. And I would say in general, especially at Carnegie Mellon, this student population these days is extremely intelligent. They know a lot. They're exposed to a lot. They're very quick. And at Carnegie Mellon, they have this kind of technology. Even the ones who are there for piano only with a music major focus, they're exposed to this incredible technology. And everybody is a tech major these days. Yeah, you have
Right.
to know how
Yeah.
to use all this
They grew up
technology, just to be alive today.
It's
they grew up
true.
in such a different environment than we did. And on kind of building on what you were talking about, what Mike asked about your experiences as a teacher being different from a lot of people that go through, the system per se, and
Hmm.
also because you have a background in computer science. I mean, this is also something that's dear to my heart. I followed sciences as well. I wonder
Hmm.
if that informs your teaching in a different way, and if you're able to give your students at Carnegie Mellon, although it's a fantastic high level school, even at a place like that, not everybody's going to become a concert pianist. So, how do
Right.
they develop a career and use different tools to bring into creating whatever that career is? Do you think you have, let's say, an advantage because you have such a diverse career?
I think so. I think that in some ways I have a little broader view just from my own personal experience and just having done it myself. I see the benefit of having studied computer science and how that
Hmm.
has enhanced and formed my piano playing and music making,
Hmm.
and vice
Hmm.
versa. I see how making music and having the piano regimen and all the things I've developed by playing the piano, all that applies to anything else that I do. And that's always been my belief that there's a very porous wall between our piano life and our real, like our real life.
Hmm.
And the learning can happen in both directions and should happen in both directions. It's not a
Hmm.
siloed. There's not part of our system that's reserved for piano playing and never used for anything else. It's everything, and we wish we had more, right?
Right, right.
Sometimes
Yeah.
we're overwhelmed by what we have to do, and we just wish we had more resources. So we're really drawing on every muscle. We're drawing on every little shred of knowledge. We're drawing on every bit of psychological understanding of ourselves, of others, to try to make this music happen. And that's all that stuff is being created all the time, whether we're working on piano or not.
Yeah, you know what? I love what you're saying there. It's one of the things I try to instill in my students is the idea of, like, if you want to be a better person, if you're finding fault in your life, you know, there's a lot of ways that you can, try to find that grounding and try to fix some
Mm-hmm.
of those things. One way, not the only way, and not maybe the best way, but one way that you can do that, a great way, is through practice music.
Yeah, totally.
Playing your instrument and putting everything into it. And if you do that one thing, like everything else falls into place.
Totally, totally. I mean, that's been the basis of my own understanding of piano. And when I started teaching workshops, this idea of body, mind, heart. I like splitting those three things out because it's kind of almost like a three-person committee inside each of us, trying to see the world in their various perspectives. And playing the piano requires like a high level of development in each of those three areas. And once it's developed, you use it for whether it's for piano playing or for doing something else. The fact that pianists practice going on stage, being in front of an audience alone, playing something from memory, uh, telling a story through music. That's something that can help us if we're getting up to make a speech at a friend's wedding. Organizing concepts, having a structure that's laid out in front of you, and knowing where you are in that structure, being able to think of two or three things at the same time. We talked about this a lot the last time I was on the show, this kind of multi-layered thinking. That comes in handy in everything. Just having multiple concepts in your head and keeping them, even though they don't fit together, keeping them there so that you can work with them and make them fit together.
Yeah.
And
The
then
amount
just
of
this attention to the body and attention to how you feel physically and what can you do, what can't you do, and how you need to practice things over and over and repeating things in order to instill some kind of reflex. Those are all things that apply to everything.
Absolutely. And I think another thing along with those lines is and we see this especially in performers, is there are no shortcuts.
Mm,
You cannot take a shortcut with any of this stuff. And sometimes people try to bypass, and maybe they use drugs, or maybe they use some non-sleep technique. People use all kinds of sorts
yeah,
of things to try to shortcut the system, but you can't. I mean, you
there's
can't
yeah,
get past the idea that you have to do the work, and you have to do it in such a way that allows your body and your soul, as you said, your mind, body, spirit, to do
integrate.
what it needs to do at full capacity.
it,
Yeah,
it also has to sit with you for a while. And invariably, I have students that start a piece, at the beginning of the semester, and very ambitious, and they want to get through it. And of course, all their other school academics, whatnot, classes get in the way, or they just don't have the discipline to practice on a regular basis and think they can cram it in the last couple weeks. And it just never quite works. I'm surprised when certain things happen and then they're very happy and proud. I'm like, well, yeah, but I was having a heart attack in the meantime.
yeah,
Just the amount of information you need to synthesize and process, it's so much greater in some ways at the piano than almost any other endeavor. And I think we've talked about this, and certainly Mike and I have had others on to talk about some of the science behind it. They've run multiple
yeah,
studies and tests, and I've been involved in some of those when I was in Montreal, on how much of the brain is lit up when you're engaging in musical study, musical learning, repetition. And it's really as more than any other field, really. So
yeah,
I
absolutely.
guess a side effect of of course, we want to do music for its own sake in a way, but the side effect is improving our mind, our everything, our spirit for life. So
Yeah. And I think,
anyway, yeah.
I totally agree with that. And I think that even within the realm of music and music making, piano and piano playing is even on the cusp of all of those things, even more than any other instrument, because of that particular combination of solo playing, the tradition of memorizing things, the fact that there's a 400-year catalog of
Right.
incredible thinking that's been put together that's accessible at any
Hmm.
moment,
Hmm.
and the multi-layered thinking in terms of being able to play more than one note at a time. All of that makes piano even more of an enhanced version of what happens when we do music.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I think,
absolutely. I
if
agree.
everybody studied piano, that would be that would solve the world problems.
Hey,
Maybe,
I'll
maybe
go
a
with
little
Oh,
that.
you
bit.
think? Yeah.
I'll go with
I
that.
think
Hey,
so.
speaking
Yeah.
of multi-layered thinking and your teaching slash performing career, and this thing that this project that your recording career with things that you're doing with this clavier and such, how has that philosophy that you brought, and I use that multi-layered thinking all the time. I just think it's such. I appreciate you bringing that up in our last conversation. It's really enhanced my life, really.
Oh,
Um,
good.
yeah, it really has. And I think, but how is adding this added aspect, how does that work with your philosophy? And obviously it does. It's called multi-layered thinking,
Yeah.
but how have you been able to manage your life and what you need to do to be on the top of your game in all these aspects?
The teaching thing has been really an opening of a door for me. That kind of cliche phrase that you learn from teaching. That really has been the case for me, and just knowing what I've gone through to get to where I am for myself, that's helped. But to be able to describe it to someone else, you have to kind of break it down and build it back up in order to have some kind of practical approach to things.
Mhm.
How do I memorize? I don't think I really codified the process that I go through in memorizing until I had to teach someone how to do it. One of the exercises that Mike you mentioned that I've been doing for myself is playing Chopin etudes in different keys, and that's something that I started doing when I realized that as I got older, I needed to kind of keep my technique up. I wasn't able to just do mental practicing, which I had been doing for many years. And so going back to what kind of technical exercises was I going to do, I hit on the Chopin etudes, but playing the same Chopin etudes over and over and over again is kind of deadly for me, deadly for the pieces. I didn't want to do that to those pieces. And so I started giving myself challenges, and I hit on the transposing as one of the most interesting approaches that made Chopin etude playing much more interesting. At the same time, it kept a lot of the technical challenges. Certainly, the mental challenges were heightened, and the
Mhm.
emotional challenges were also kind of a side benefit that I didn't realize until I started doing more and more, and until I started assigning this particular exercise to my students. And the very first time I thought, okay, should I make other people do this thing that I do? I was like, I'll give them the option. And a couple of my students took it on. A couple of my students decided not to do it, but I saw the results immediately. So now I impose it on all my students. Every lesson starts with them sitting down and playing a Chopin etude in a different key.
Wow.
Wow, that's
And
pretty
very, all
amazing.
of them
Crazy.
choose one, and then they go through keys week by week. And there are 12 keys. There happen to be 14 weeks in a semester, so they take a couple semesters to repeat stuff that they didn't do well. But basically, they finish an etude in a semester, and they get a little certificate from me, and they get all the benefits, body, mind, heart benefits from having done the exercise. And I'm surprised and very happily surprised that every single one of my students has been able to do it.
Oh,
That's very impressive to me. And I'm only thinking because I've done, I've played a number of them, and I'm just thinking in the back of my mind the technical challenges that would arise in some of them from changing keys might be seemingly insurmountable. I'm also thinking of Godowski, who did his own versions,
Yeah.
and taking Opus 10 Number 1 and doing it in D flat instead of C major for the left hand. It actually kind
Mhm.
of fits quite well, but thinking of some of those awkward arpeggios, some might be a little bit easier. The famous A major one is crazy, but I
Yeah.
guess in B flat major, if you go up a half step, maybe it's a little easier. Although then some of the others become
The
extremely
others are hard.
difficult.
Yeah. The opus 10 number one is very interesting. When I started doing this exercise, I charted it out, and according to my chart, of the 24 keys and 12 major and 12 minor keys, 19 of them appear at some point in opus 10 number one.
Oh
Mhm.
wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
In various
yeah. Inversion
inversions. So,
forms. Yeah.
the positions are not exactly the same, but all 19 of the keys out of 24 appear at some point, which means that if you shift it to any other key, you've basically already played that key somewhere else. And so when you think about it like that, you realize it's not an insurmountable challenge. It's just a matter of which one do I play next
Mhm.
and in what inversion. And so then it's just a matter of practicing all your arpeggios, and it becomes a mental exercise of keeping track of where you're going and where you've been.
Mhm.
And on an emotional level, you get very different feelings from these different keys.
Uh-huh.
Playing it in D flat feels very, I don't know, for me it feels warm, it feels very lyrical. Playing it in C major is very bright and energetic. Playing it in A major has a very kind of grit your teeth feeling. This is all for me, but it sensitizes me to differences of key colors, key characters,
So,
and
so
it makes me exercise that.
I have a quick question. I forgot. Do you have perfect pitch?
No, I do not.
Okay, so I don't either. And but I've had students through the years that have, a few here and there. And I remember last year I had one who always talked about certain colors associated with keys. So I had her write down a list of
Mm.
all the keys and the colors. And I think I'd like to ask other students at some point and maybe run like a side little study of my own to see how
Right.
they think. Because I know Scriabin also wrote down his ideas of the color of each key.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, synesthesia, they call that, right?
Yeah.
The association of one sense to the other. Yeah, no, I think that for me, I was sensitized to things that I didn't realize. Like when I played it in C major, and only in C major, I could only hear it in one way. And it wasn't until I started doing it in other keys did I say to myself, oh, I have an option to play it differently. I could play it slower. I could play it faster. I can accent this one or bring this one out.
Mm.
I could diminuendo here. Because the other keys suggested a different way of organizing the structure.
Right. Like
And
like physically.
that opened it up. When I went back to C major, I was hearing it in many more different options, and that
Oh
of course
yeah.
makes it much more interesting and much more artistic and expressive.
Well, it gives you so many more tools when you do go back and I could absolutely see that is it gives you the tools to, if you hear something or want to try to implement something. Elias and I have talked about this, how in a performance at times, you might want to, you might feel something and want to experiment a little bit, but if you don't
Hmm.
have the tool, you can't do it.
You can't do it,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
This is the
Yeah.
exercise is also a very interesting um, kind of a study of where your strengths and your weaknesses are.
Oh yeah.
And I've seen, my different students approaching the exercise in different ways. Some of them are very wedded to the score and they're constantly looking at the score and calculating intervals. Others write out a kind of a harmonic chart. Others don't use the score at all and they don't write out a chart. They're just going by ear. Like they know how
Oh
it should sound. And
yeah.
others just kind of physically work it out. They know, that these positions feel like this, and they replicate those or they alter those, and
Okay.
it kind of
I,
gives insight into whether they're body oriented or mind oriented or heart oriented players, and that can be a big self understanding for their work in general.
Absolutely. And that was actually going to be my next question is whether you have them transpose them on the fly, if you have them, transcribe it in the different key or how they, practically go about doing that. And you kind of answered that you allow
Yeah,
them to have different
I
approaches.
let them. I make them experiment a little bit. First, I let them. or make them kind of confront their fears, like they're sitting in front of the first one and just saying to themselves, I can't do it, I can't do it, it's impossible to do, it's impossible to do. And they work it out note by note. And sometimes that first one takes weeks to work out.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And I'm there and I encourage them and I give them little hints, but I really want them to accomplish this themselves. And so some of them, out of desperation, will just write the whole thing out. And once they do that, then they realize, okay, this is a lot of work. I'm gonna refine it a little bit. I see some patterns. I see some things that I can hang on to.
Sure,
The
yeah.
second one's a little bit better. The third one's faster. The fourth one's even faster. And then by the time they get to 6 or 7, usually they're just kind of churning them out. And if there were 20 keys, they could do 20.
Do you find
because they know how the piece is put together?
Yeah.
I don't know how many students you've had now doing this, but I guess after a few years you'll amass quite a few. Do you find that certain students gravitate towards certain etudes, or some are easier to transpose? Or there's like a sharp learning curve for some, but the others are more long-term difficulties.
I think the ones that I kind of start off with, Opus 10 number 1 is a good one.
Mm-hmm.
Opus 25 number 1 is a good one.
Yeah.
The
Maybe
Heart,
Ocean,
and then the Ocean, 25 number 12. Those are the three kind of go-to starter ones because they're pretty straightforward technically. Once you get the position, you just play the pattern. And it kind of reduces the amount of complexity. And then I let them choose the second one. And I had one student who was actually a computer science master's student, not a piano major at all, and he was taking elective piano with me. And he did Opus 10 number 1 for his first one. Did that pretty well. I asked him, okay, you did that. Now what's the second one you want to do? And he said, Opus 10 number 5, Black Key Etude. And I kind of flinched at that because I personally have not done that one myself. Not that I have to. I want them to just pick the one that they're comfortable with, that they know well. And he said, I'd like to do Opus 10 number 5. And I said, okay. He came in and played that the next week, and it was in great shape. He had no problems with it. I said, okay, what key do you want to go? Do you want to go? There are different approaches. You can go in circle of fifths, up.
Chromatic.
You can go in circle of fifths down. You can go chromatically up, chromatically down. So there are different options, and there are pros and cons to each of them. And he said, I'd like to do G major next time. I said, okay, it'll be very interesting. I can't wait to see what happens. He came back the next week, and we were going to start with that. So I said, so how did the etude go? And he said, I don't know yet. I haven't had a chance to work it out on the piano, but I've worked it out in my head on my way to class. I've worked on it every day, and I think I got it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
He sat down and boom, in tempo, almost didn't miss a note. I was so astonished. I took a little video of it. I posted it on my Facebook page, a little clip of him just doing it.
Wow.
Without having physically practiced it. So, obviously for that student, the mind is the driving factor. Whatever he can think, he can pretty much do. He's going to approach it in that way, kind of using imagery, using his understanding and his memory of the original to work it out in his head. Other students are not ever going to be able to do that. But they will be able to hear it and, hear the color of the next chord, and they'll know instinctively what pattern to play. Other students have a strong physical understanding, a kind of topographical knowledge of the keyboard, and they'll work it out in a different way. So each of these students comes to me with their way eventually. They're using their strengths and shoring up their weaknesses to do this exercise. And I've been extremely happy having decided now everybody's going to do it. It's just a little warm up. Start your lesson with that, and then we move on to the stuff that we're going to work on. And it's great. Everybody for their first one, they say, "Oh, I can't do it. I like to be excused." I say, "No way. Everybody has done it, and I'm not going to tell you how to do it. You're just going to do it." And they protest, and they come and they do it. It's
Yeah,
really
yeah.
Wow.
remarkable.
Now,
Right.
how is having that approach or doing that exercise on a consistent basis, helped you? But I'm also curious about your students, like how in their other work and their core work and the things that they're, getting ready to, how have you seen an improvement with that kind of, with
Yeah,
the etudes moving on to other pieces?
yeah. I think when you work on these Chopin etudes, there's always a part in the development section where Chopin himself goes into different keys with the same material. Like he'll do a sequence and he'll do it once, and then he'll move it up a half step and do it again, and move it up a whole step and do it again, and then you get to the return. Immediately in that piece, you see that by transposing and by figuring out how to transpose, you've taken care of basically 3 entire sections without having to work.
Right.
Once you see that, then you start noticing in other pieces, oh, that's a sequence. It's the same thing. Now it's up a fifth, and now it's down a fourth. Now it's up a fifth. Now it's down a fourth.
Right. Now it's in the left hand. Now
Now
it's
it's in the
here.
left hand. Now it's in the right hand. So it just naturally reveals itself in the music on that kind of intellectual level. And so on a mental level, it helps with recognizing patterns and structure. On a physical level, there's just this understanding of the keyboard that comes from having to play the same music but with different keys, black and white keys alternating, or randomly being different. It just makes you much more aware of what technique you have to use. And on an emotional level, I mentioned the sensitivity to the color of the different tonalities. That's definitely one thing. But I think on an emotional level, even more than that, it's the idea that they tried something that they thought they couldn't ever do, that was out of their league, and they accomplished it. And now they feel like, oh, here's this huge sonata. I'll never be able to learn this, but yes, I can. There's a sense of I can approach something that I think is impossible, and just step by step by step by step, I can do it. One key after another, I can do all 12 keys for this etude. Step by step by step, measure by measure, I can learn this huge 30-minute sonata that seemed insurmountable before. So I think that on that sense, the emotional training is perhaps the most useful and productive, because it's not linked to any particular piece or even any piece at all. It's linked to, am I able to accomplish
the process and the goal.
Yeah.
Can I do hard things?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So
important.
and it is interesting. Like in any realm, you get to a point where you're pushing against your boundaries. And if you and if you're a talented player, if you're a talented person in whatever field you're in, you find it harder and harder when you hit those boundaries. This is my experience, that when one finds that boundary, the more talented they are, the more difficult it is to do the thing that is necessary to overcome that boundary.
Yeah.
You know, if something comes difficult to somebody from the beginning, they have no problem like moving on, moving forward. But if some of these talented kids, it comes so easy to them, and then something gets hard, and something will get hard, and then it's almost like that's when they want to quit. And it's like, no, this is when it gets fun.
Right. This is where you're actually doing something that you're not used to doing.
Right.
Yeah, it can be tough to teach pre-collegiate students who are very talented. I've had a couple middle school and high school students who have so much talent, and it's pretty easy. And then I just think, gosh, what's going to happen when they get to a real challenge? And sometimes they just don't go. They plateau. They don't go beyond something. They don't dig deeper because they don't feel they need to. Right. And that to me, it's almost like, are you really going to go far in music? I think that's one of the hardest things and most important things, is to continue pushing yourself.
Right.
Otherwise, you go into a field where, okay, you've reached a very high level and you're successful, and that's fine. That's good enough. You don't need to go
Right.
beyond that.
Yeah,
Good
and
enough.
I think the Chopin transposition etude, transposition exercise, has helped me, has given the students an opportunity to see what it feels like to be at the limit of your ability,
Mm,
be that physical, mental, or emotional, because that's important to recognize. When are you at what Mike was talking about, that frontier where it's hard to push through?
mhm,
What is it? What does it feel like, so that you can recognize when you're there and realize that the next step you take in that direction is going to actually create some new space for yourself. You're
Yeah.
not just in your old space rearranging the furniture and feeling nice and comfortable.
right.
You're actually on the wall and digging through the wall.
Mhm,
And that's
Yeah.
not something that you can do in one go and just clear a whole
mhm,
room space. You have to do that day by day, clearing a little bit. But it's important to know, when that process is starting,
mhm.
and when do you let it go for today, knowing that you're going to come back tomorrow when you've recovered a little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you have to practice also doing that,
You have to
and
practice
I
doing
think
that.
as we get older,
Yeah.
it gets harder and harder, and um, you often see people, and it's not all the time, but they're so used to doing something for 40 or 50 years, and it's worked, and so why change? Why try something new? And
Yeah,
the mind is slowing. I've noticed it even in myself, and my wife and I both talk about that in dealing with very established people when we're in organizations or whatever, teaching,
yeah,
even students that we've had that have started much later in life. They're just not used to restarting and reassessing and the continual questioning that comes with music practice. And I said, yeah, this is a big challenge, and but it's a beautiful challenge if you can look at it that way.
right. And I remind my students, it's a safe space to be
Yeah.
challenged in
Yes,
those
exactly.
areas, because nobody's going to die if you don't play this piece well.
Right. They might throw tomatoes, but yeah.
So, it's a nice microcosm to experiment with body, mind, and heart.
Mhm.
And once you develop that, then you take it into a larger context,
That,
and then there are consequences for
that
not being
just
able to physically, mentally, or emotionally do certain things. Right?
Mhm.
just for context, when did you start doing this for yourself?
I started doing like technical exercises when I turned 40,
Okay. Okay.
and the Chopin Etude exercise came very quickly after that, and that was it was for me that emotional challenge of like, why am I doing this?
Mhm.
Is this really something that I can accomplish realistically? And the first few really took a lot of time to do, and then it got into something where I feel like I sit down and I'll start with Opus 10 number one. That's my go-to. I'll just
Mhm.
play it in whatever random key my hand lands on, and I'll play through it on that key.
Wow.
And it's a
That's
great.
cool.
And I do two hand things. I do a little, like little variants, Godowski style
Mhm.
things, not worked out like his, but I'll do
Mhm.
parallel octaves in left and right hand just to have the left hand working also. And
Mhm.
that's just a great. It's 5 minutes, great exercise, and I feel all warmed up. And I think that has been something that has bolstered my progress in piano playing in the last 20 years.
And I think that's kind of one of the points I wanted to make is this is not some like a lot of people a lot of people could say you were at the peak of your powers, at the peak of your ability to play. Like at 40 years old, you've gained all the technical prowess that you really need to get through, but you had this desire to improve and get even better and improve yourself even more. And that, I think, is an example. I'll say it that way. I think it's an example that we can look towards and go, wait, if
Mhm.
this guy who is this good, and is this well known, and is doing the things that he's doing, feels a need to improve and get better. Like, uh, I just think that's a great example, and I appreciate you sharing that, and then passing it on to your students. I think it's just a wonderful legacy you're leaving.
Well, I'm trying to be a model. I think that's one of the things that I'm trying to leverage. My inexperience as a teacher means perhaps more experience as a performer and some of the more practical approaches to certain things. If I can model that and give them an approach to that, then I feel very happy.
But to be fair to you also, and to give you because I think there's this belief that a lot of great performers out there are very talented. Obviously, they've been great from being kids, and they might not know how to kind of relate or explain something because they've just done it their whole lives.
Yeah,
And I think the fact that you have a different field, and you're always analyzing and self-analyzing, gives you a leg up just in how to translate that or convey that to somebody. And I think that's very important. And I wish, look, we've talked about these kinds of things, but in looking for positions myself, it's very tough and to find the qualifications for that. And I think you're
hmm
a very good match between all of those. So I think Carnegie Mellon, I think they're very lucky.
well, I feel very lucky. That's been one of the wonderful things that happened over the pandemic. I'm daily grateful for that.
That's wonderful. Well, let's move into this Disclavier project, and it sounds so exciting. And I truly, I had no idea until we talked today the kind of technology that Disclavier is capable of doing, and it's kind of exciting. So, talk to us a little bit about your association and what the project is, and how that has come to be.
Yeah, well, I've had a long relationship with Yamaha, over 35 years of working with them as Yamaha artist. And coincidentally, the whole Disclavier technology started 35 years ago with just a very
Mhm.
simple player piano setup where you play this note and it will play back that note. And it
Mhm.
wasn't through a paper roll with a hole in it with air blowing and stuff. It was, digital, but
Right.
it was very, very primitive. And over the years, they've put a lot of research into this, and with each iteration, taking 5, 7, 8 years between iterations, they've added nuance, they've added resolution, they've added complexity, and I've been, I like to think that I've been part of that, either testing their machines or making suggestions or putting their instruments on stage and seeing how they perform on the ground, like in a real setting. And the last iteration, which is called Inspire, is just absolutely remarkable. It's as I can't imagine it getting more fidelity to the original playing than it is now. And it will never be a perfect reproduction of the playing because the piano is an organic machine. It's made of wood, it's made of metal. Those things change with time and use and humidity and temperature.
Mhm.
So, given those factors, I think that the Discovery today is about as good as you're going to find anywhere in reproducing what the pianist makes the instrument do. So,
Mhm.
basically, whatever notes I play in whatever timing and whatever velocity, they call the speed that the key goes down in, that's called the velocity. Whatever velocity, whatever coordination of different attacks and the pedal, all those things are reproduced and the piano gets played the same way that you just played it. So with that kind of technology, I've been able to present two piano concerts where I've pre-recorded piano two, and on stage we play that back with me playing piano one live, watching my video of the performance for head cues and hand cues. It's I've done that for many years, and this last recording project is kind of a smaller version of that with Schubert four-hand pieces, which all happen on the same piano, one piano, and I've recorded both parts and synchronized them. So the playback can be the two parts together, synchronized, so it's like a piano duo that happens to be me and myself playing this piece back. But the owner of this recording can also choose to play back piano 2 and sit down on the right side of the piano and play piano 1 along with it. Or vice versa, have piano 1 playing and sit on the left side of the piano and play the piano 2 part. And make music that way and experiment with timing, experiment with nuance. It's a very interactive recording, not just something that you put on and just listen to.
So that's amazing. I have a couple thoughts. One is the sort of music minus one, which became popular way back, where you could practice concerto with that.
Yeah.
It's sort of taking that to the next level. Just a little background too. I have a bit of a connection. I worked at a Yamaha place, and of course, this is, I think, the previous iteration of the Disclavier, and there were two versions. One that goes with the CNS series, and one that goes with the lower. And I was working with that one, and they're incredible. And there are a couple other companies out there that are equally. I mean, I think equally pretty incredible too. They're not inexpensive, but they're pretty amazing tools that you can use. And I think it can be great for students too, as a side note, because you can record and play back and listen and watch and see, actually, were you playing that note? And were you holding this note as long as you think you were? And it gives you more feedback than maybe just your ears in the time.
Absolutely.
I do have a couple logistical questions with playing back with yourself playing already. For example, with the Schubert, so the F minor fantasy, I've performed a lot with my wife, and
And that's on
I
your
know,
list.
the coordination is hard enough when you've got two people. It would seem, especially with that march, the dotted rhythm, very difficult to time that if you're kind of doing a listen or a playback with yourself on a recording. I wonder if you could talk to that aspect. The other aspect is it's very uncomfortable, I think, to play four-hand music, and even more uncomfortable to play six-hand music. But did you find it was easier to play when you're just sitting at the piano on your own, that second or secondo or primo part with the other part recorded, or was maybe it wasn't, or it was about the same?
I had to figure out a protocol to make it work for timing reasons, but also to not make it metronomic. Of course, if I put on a metronome, that metronome sound would not be recorded onto the Disclavier recording, but it would also be just this irrevocable, unmovable beat, and remove any sense of nuance, timing. So I didn't want to do that. So what I came to was kind of an iterative approach where I played one part while imagining the other part. And then I would play back the other part while playing the original part, re-recording that.
Okay.
And then I would play that part back and re-record the other part. So I would play piano 1 first and play piano 2 to it, play piano 2 back and record number 1 to it, and then play 1 back and record number 2. So back and forth like 2 or 3 times like that seemed to, first of all, give me a very good memory of what I was doing nuance-wise, and in particular with timing. But then also the final step is to go into the MIDI data and to edit some stuff.
Okay.
And it was very interesting because you can line notes up and make them appear, attack at exactly the same time when you visually can put them in a straight line. At the same time, sometimes you can't do that. If you put it in a straight line, sometimes with the Disclavier, the way the technology is notated, they will come, the attacks will be, what's the word? They'll be off. Even though visually they're on, just because of the mechanics of the instrument. So there's some knowledge of how the Disclavier works that has to come into play. And in the end, with the editing, it makes it possible to just hear it back, and if it's not quite right, you go in and tweak a little bit. If it's not quite right, you tweak a little bit until you get it right. So
Uh-huh.
that was definitely a tool that was necessary for the final step.
I wonder, we've had Brett Leonard on a number of times, who's a recording engineer, teaches up in the in the Midwest, and he was my recording engineer for 2 albums, and I remember the amount of time for one edit in particular where we just could not find an intro and an outro that matched the ambient sound, or the atmosphere that was being created. It was extremely difficult for, maybe a 5-second clip.
Yeah.
And just kind of the fade in, fade out was very difficult. What you're explaining, it seems like another type of technique, maybe some pros, some cons to splicing or editing with disc clever technology. Is
Yeah,
that
and I think actually this is one of the places where the disc guitar has sort of revolutionized piano playing, which is the solo piano recording. And I've made my last few recordings using this technique where I don't do any audio splicing.
Mm,
I only do MIDI editing and then do a quote unquote print of that MIDI track, which is
mm,
the playback on a disclavier with microphones capturing the audio of that playback.
Right.
mhm.
And
Wow.
that's, for me, it's revolutionary because it saves a lot of time. It also encourages musical playing versus this kind of like have to be clean, have to match this tempo, have to match this ambiance in order for the splice to happen.
Right.
I found, because I've done quite a bit of audio recording, I found that when you get into those situations where you know exactly what note is wrong, and you get to that passage, you have to play it right, and you have to play it at this tempo and that dynamic level. It's very constricting.
Mhm, mhm.
It makes everything else like non-musical.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mhm,
Whereas if I know that I can just go into the MIDI and change that wrong note to the right note, but it will have the same nuance, it will have the same attack, it will have the same timing as if I played the right note, but I don't have to do it, and it will do it on the playback. I'm actually more motivated to take musical risks, timing risks, dynamic risks, tempo risks, uh, because I know that if I get pretty much everything right, but a couple of wrong notes, I can go and shift those notes, the signal for those notes to the right ones and play back, and it will be the right playing when it plays back.
I wonder if there's a different philosophical discussion to be had, because in the past, just the idea of being able to splice. So if we take very early recordings like the piano rolls,
Mm,
it was also relatively simple. If you have the wrong note in some place, you just cover over with paper, you punch a hole in a new place,
right.
and there you've got it. It's at the same time, everything is there. It's almost like the manual version of what's happening today. But then
Right.
with audio recording, just the concept of, oh, you can miss it and then fix it, and this created the whole atmosphere of when you hear recordings like, oh well, they can't really play, and there are plenty of recording artists out there who really can't, and have wonderful recording engineers who have
Yeah.
created great CDs for them. And so now we're almost getting to a happy medium, or the best of both worlds, where you can go in and manually change those little things but still capture that essence. I don't know. To me, it's like a new frontier, so it comes with new
Yeah.
philosophical questions.
Yeah. Totally. And my attitude towards recording has always been more of the Glenn Gould school, where
Hmm.
if technology allows it, then we should be able to do
Do
it.
it. Hmm.
Yeah, I think
And it's more about envisioning the final product, how it's
mm,
structured, how it plays out, and how you get there is less material than the final result itself.
yeah, it seems to me like you can make a distinction between a studio recording or recording that is like supposed to be this pristine um, pr- vision of what you imagine versus a concert recording or a live recording. I think
Yeah,
that we can do that and go, okay, yeah, this guy can play because we can hear his recordings, but
yeah,
this is what he actually envisions.
yeah. I mean, if we take pop music as a model, I mean, there is some incredibly complex rock and pop songs. They were not recorded or played that way. They were completely constructed from little clips and snippets and sound effects and layered and layered and layered and going through many hands until it reached the final version that we hear on the radio. Then the artist who is cited as being the lead singer on that particular song, they have to actually learn how to sing that version
Yeah.
Right.
so that
And
they can
often
do it
they
in
can't.
concert. So in the end, they never recorded it that way, but their live version is pretty close to that way because that's what they learned.
Oh, Eddie Van Halen was famous for when he would record his guitar solos on his tunes. He would do like 20 different versions of a solo, and then they would literally just pick this part, this 3 seconds, this 3 seconds, this 5 seconds. They'd splice it together, and then he'd have to relearn exactly what you're talking about. He had to relearn how to play
Exactly.
his solo.
Yeah.
Yeah. And filmmakers, they don't shoot the film from the first scene to the last scene in order, and they're splicing and snipping and editing. So I really feel that music, certainly there's a feeling of like wonder and astonishment when you hear someone play something live from beginning to end, and it's remarkable with flaws or no flaws, whatever it is. It's remarkable when you know that, but it's only one way of hearing a recording, and there are so many other ways of hearing other recordings. And I've always felt that if it's possible to get what you want through some editing, there's nothing wrong with that at all. And it actually will make me try to practice and try to play it, that way.
Yeah, that's
Oh yeah,
refreshing.
that's true.
With the pop music analogy, I think of, so much of it, at least in today's world, and now I sound like an old fogey. The pop music today sounds so produced or overproduced, and it's almost not even about the artists. Certainly in K-pop,
Yeah,
they just put artists together. They're not even a
yeah,
formed band that tours and then practices and then
right,
records. They're just like, oh, we need this, we need that, and we'll just do it all in the studio.
right.
Then what happens sometimes in concerts is these bands or artists go and they just can't live up to
And
what they
that's
have
it.
on the recording.
Yeah,
And then you get the famous lip syncing,
right,
fiascos.
right. Yeah,
So
so maybe we can use the disc clavier to finger sync,
yeah,
Hey, well, speaking of
like go up and do some gyrations seated in front of the disc clavier.
Well, and as somebody that performs in a lot of different settings and with different bands and things like that, one of the exciting technologies that I've seen that is starting to emerge is MIDI 2.0.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an exciting technology because now instead of just having 128 velocity segments, for example, you can have millions.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's really remarkable. I'm curious about where if there is going to be an evolution in the disc clavier technology, if they'll be utilizing that MIDI 2.0 technology a lot more.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the Inspire is what they call a high resolution signal.
Mhm.
And strangely enough, in order to edit the stuff, I have to go back to a lower resolution in order for the machine to handle the data.
Mhm.
But eventually, they'll figure out a way to edit high resolution disc clavier data. But the funny thing is, I pushed them to go from 64 nuances in the pedal position to today's 256. When it was
Yeah.
64, I was able to find those things in between,
Mhm.
and it wasn't reproducing that. You could tell that in the performance. With 256, I would say that it's within the range of this kind of organic wood and metal kind of moving around within that era. So
Right.
there's no sense in going beyond that. And the keys, there's 1024 gradations of it going down and 1024 gradations of velocity going up.
Mhm.
And that is also something that I noticed has made a difference, but I don't see it making any more difference during the high
Mhm.
resolution.
Mhm.
So I
It's
think
the
because we're
limit of
dealing with
image.
real life stuff and not pure digital, I think that it's not going to be that noticeable. I may be wrong, and I'm certainly eager to see that happening. But I
Mhm.
think that the disc clavier thing
No,
is
there is a you do see that happen, and you see that in audio recording. You don't really, people record at like 192K or whatever, but our ears can't hear that high, and it's
Right.
it's kind of ridiculous. But but there's reasons to do it, I guess.
Right.
That's an interesting take. That's cool.
Wow.
I'm wondering if we have time, I'd love to chat a little bit about your the programs that you have done in the past. I don't know if you're going to do more, but the composer
The
The
Smackdown.
smackdowns.
the classical smackdowns, yeah.
Those are so fun.
They are a lot of fun. I'm preparing right now as we speak. I'm preparing for a series of them up in Hanover, New Hampshire, Dartmouth College. I'm going to be doing my Time Travelers one, which is the music of Bach versus music of Philip Glass.
Oh, that's
And
cool.
then also a little bit of Heart and Soul, which is music of Prokofiev versus Debussy. And both of those have been I've done those many times, and the results are extremely close. Like it's almost 50-50 down the middle in terms of who wins overall. It's a very interesting way of splitting kind of the musical universe, and it seems to come right down the middle. And the other program that I do in this SmackDown series, which I debuted, I think probably like right when we were doing the other episode, or right after that, is called Young Geniuses, and that's the music of Felix Mendelssohn versus Frederic Chopin that they wrote before the age of 20.
Oh, wow.
And
It
that's
seems
a
like a dueling. It's like a dueling pianos meets WWF, WWE.
yeah, it started off as kind of a fun idea. I've since come to see a lot of very kind of deep effect that it's having on audiences that come to hear this.
Oh, good.
The reaction of audiences has been actually quite remarkable because a lot of people who come to classical music concerts, they feel like they need to know all about the composers or they can't really relax and enjoy the program. But this program and this whole series is designed for anybody to just experience two musical things and say, I like this one better than that one.
Right.
And it's released a lot of, I think, pent up tension in my audience, and I get all sorts of thanks and all sorts of very interesting comments from audiences on their ballots when I tally the results of these SmackDown concerts.
Well, and like you with your Time Travelers one, when you have, if I'm not mistaken, you're doing Bach and Glass,
That's
Bach
right.
versus Glass, and that's you put those not because
Juxtaposition.
I mean they're so different in so many ways. I mean you can kind of tell a story of Western music,
Yeah.
with that.
Of that. Yeah, totally. And I found some very interesting places where they overlap, that Venn diagram intersection space. They're both very contrapuntal, very multi-layered thinking in different ways, but definitely multi-layered. They both have kind of an effect on our sense of time. And I tell the audience to give them kind of a primer in what to think about. That famous clip of an apple being shot by a bullet in slow motion, where the bullet enters the apple and then the insides of the apple start exploding almost like a fountain, and the bullet goes through, and it's almost like a ballet. And then the other image is a time lapse of Grand Central during rush hour, with people going up and down the escalators and running around the foyer. And you start seeing patterns of groups of people shifting left and right, moving up and down. Both of those are time shifting phenomenon visually. And I have a sense that Bach and Glass both do that kind of time shifting in some very interesting ways. Not just one does one kind and the other does the other kind, but they both play with this idea of time and repetition and rhythm and perception. So I found that this particular contest is a very meditative moment, even though the musics are very different, but in a very deep way. They're very spiritual and they're very kind of affecting in a similar way.
Are you presenting those in Arizona anytime soon?
I would love to. If you know who I should contact to get
Sure.
a piano recital going on, I would love to do those.
That seems fun.
Yeah,
This is
that would be.
something else. Boy, I'd love to have my festival in Albuquerque. I'd love to present you, but it's maybe not a big enough festival, but it's getting there. So maybe you'd be interested in presenting
Uh,
as a feature concert.
Totally, totally. Let's talk about that.
Sure. Yeah, these
Yeah,
sound awesome. I mean, I almost want to get into the nitty gritty of them, but I also want to be surprised if I were to hear one of these because part of me, we play concerts for such different types of audiences, and I feel nowadays we have to really relate to non-musicians more and more.
yeah.
And one of those ways is, of course, to talk. And I remember maybe 15 or 20 years ago, a colleague of mine had, I don't know, it was like an article written about how, oh, this person talks during his performance. What a revelation. And I thought, gosh, I've been doing that for years. And isn't that something that we're not trained to do? But then after school, we realize we have to because we're playing for, our grandparents or at a
Right,
retirement home. And they have no clue. I mean, they don't care about the, 5/1 cadence at the end of a Beethoven sonata. So
right.
we have to make it relatable. And so what your program is doing when I first hear it, and then I think, okay, he's feeling some niche. Maybe it's a little kitschy. I'm being brutally honest, sorry,
No,
but
totally.
then I realize there's actually a lot of fodder in there and a lot of connection that can be made. And if it's presented in the right way, and I know you're taking it very seriously, that there's probably a lot of interconnectivity there that
Mhm.
that's illuminating and really brings people in and takes them to a new level. So I almost want to experience that from a novice's standpoint because,
Yeah,
like you
well, I
said,
think what happens is that everybody does get put into a novice
hmm
mindset when they hear this because of this very simple and stupid act of voting,
yeah,
which
yeah, exactly. I'm like, what?
absolutely no consequence on anything at all. And yet, when you're tasked to do that, all of a sudden you start hearing things differently. You
Yeah,
start
Right.
asking different questions, and you start valuing certain aspects more than these aspects. And like, okay, I'm going to score this, I'm going to score that, and see how it comes out. You start asking and answering questions in a different way.
yeah, and I think you're using the modern age. I mean, I'm always trying to think, how do we get people involved more, and not just the older generation because they're already involved in some
Yeah,
ways, or they don't care about it, or they've written it off, and they're not going to be around forever, at
yeah,
least for my whole career. But young audiences, they don't appreciate it the same way. So how do I integrate something like this? And even at our festival in here in Arizona, we think about how do we do that, and what a great way to do it without selling out. That's what I like. Is these projects have the the foundation is that there's great stuff in here. All the
yeah.
stuff is great, and you're just enhancing it with the technology of today.
One of the great moments in any SmackDown concert is at the very end when the lights come up and everybody is still in their seats.
Yeah. Yep.
And
Right.
they're debating with each other and comparing notes and discussing and only slowly getting up from their seats and heading out to the lobby because
Wow.
they're involved in listening and digesting the program. And that's for a family, like kids talking to their grandparents if they happen to
Yeah.
come to the same concert, and they're comparing notes and they're talking about their experiences and disagreeing with each other and reinforcing
hmm
each other. And I like to watch
That's
from
beautiful.
backstage. I like to watch that because it's really so different than the concert where the lights come up and half the people are out of their seats trying to rush to the parking lot to get out first.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. It's a
No, that
beautiful
that
idea.
that is beautiful, and and you talked about this before about we have this 400-year-old rich history of music literature that if any way that you can introduce that to them, and it's just beautiful, and yeah, amen. That
Well,
if you come to the Southwest, we'll have to figure out how to get you out here, man.
definitely.
Yeah.
Let's
My brain
figure
is
that out.
churning. Yeah, let's do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, there's a lot more we can discuss, but I just appreciate your time so much, Frederic. And if people want to follow what you're doing, if people want to, see where they can see you next and all that, is your website the best place to go?
Website's the best place, frederickchiu.com. I try to keep my schedule up to date, and all my projects are there. And there's always stuff on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel where I post things. There's a Patreon for some more insider kind of stuff, tracks from my personal vault of recordings, things that I try out, and access to behind the scenes kind of stuff on the Patreon. So there's all sorts of things.
Wonderful. We'll definitely put those links and get, love people to support, your great work. So thanks again for joining us. We'll have you on again. I hope.
Yeah. I love
so.
These discussions. You're like such a model out there. So thanks for what you're doing.
Thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure. It's great to talk with you guys.
Mike is gone.
You are listening to And If Love Remains.
Gone but not forgotten.
First of 23 installments requested by Dr. Levitt. Trying to be in compliance here because we're taking him and that whole organization down.